Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Passionate People and Preposterous Peeves. I'm your host, Ike. I'm here with Sean. Say hello, Sean.
Hello.
How you doing today, bud?
I'm doing all right. I'm glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. We're glad to have you. First up, though, what's your favorite dad joke?
So I am a big fan of Hank Green's dad jokes. So I just mercilessly steal his dad jokes whenever I have an opportunity.
Wise choice.
Yeah. But I think the hardest thing is actually selecting from among them. But really what it would be is that there's this Greek tailor that really has a problem with his customer. And the customer comes back in and says, well, why can't you fix my pants? And he says, well, Euripides.
I think what makes it so good is that there's so much lead up to such a quick send off.
It's not and I've also butchered it well beyond what the Green Brothers have done with their work in that area.
I don't know. I'm laughing. I think you did great. Speaking of literary works, do you have a favorite underutilized word?
Wrath. You and I met each other playing Magic the Gathering. And
True facts.
Wrath is a very commonly used word there. It's just shorthand. But in the general context of like anger that then gets expressed as violence from above, I feel like there's definitely an opportunity to use that word more often these days.
Truly. There's a lot of wrath going around. Not that we condone it, but if you're going to be wrathful, at least use the right word.
It's a great descriptor.
When wrathing. What is your biggest everyday run-of-the-mill temptation?
Just candy. I have a hard time not saying no to candy. And the thing that did this for me most recently was when I have the opportunity every year around the holidays, I order candy from this store that I went to when I was a kid, because my family had a ranch up in the far north of California, this little town called Petrolia, and you had to go through this other little town called Ferndale to get there. And there was
Ferndale!
Yeah, so there's this store.
I used to live up in Humboldt County. I totally know Ferndale. Okay, I think I actually know the chocolate shop you're talking about.
Yeah, it's called Sweetness and Light. It's a wonderful little place. And so every time I would go to the ranch with my family for Christmas or whatever, we would stop by in there. And then I also ended up going to College of the Redwoods for junior college when I was, community college when I was there. And so Ferndale was real close nearby. And they have these cappuccino truffles that are just amazing. They are the best thing I've ever tasted. And so I ordered this every year for holidays. I send them to my mom, send them to friends, whatever. And I ordered some this year. And I got sort of ahead of myself in the order. And it was like a couple $100 worth of candy from this place that I was ordering to be mailed to various people. And as I'm doing this, they have this thing on the order site where you're like, oh, ship it to multiple places. Seems great. Let's go do that. And so I split up my order, sent it to all these places. I get the confirmation email after it's already been in the mail. And now that it's in the mail, it's all going to an old address of mine here in Seattle. And so I call them immediately. I'm like, hey guys, I think you screwed this up. And they're like, yep, we did. And so we're just going to send it to everybody again, except for the one coming to your old address at Ballard. You go find it yourself. And so I did. I went over and stole a package addressed to myself off of my old porch. But it was
now you have an extra couple 100 pounds of candy.
I mean, it's a couple $100 worth of candy, but yeah, it's great stuff. And so
temptation reeks anew this Christmas season for you.
Yeah, well, so but it really won me Thanksgiving when I brought it to a friend's house. So it was.
Oh yeah. So interesting misconnection. We're both good friends with David Martinez.
Yeah,
who lives currently up in Humboldt. Who introduced me to Sweetness and Light when I lived up there, and he was my roommate, which is kind of fascinating. So That's so wild.
Yeah, David's one of those folks that when he lived in Sacramento, we crossed paths several times throughout the gaming community there. Yeah.
That's so funny because I met you and had never met Martinez. We were friends when I went to college the first time when I was 19, went there for a year, dropped out and vanished. Ended up moving up to Humboldt 3 years later or something like that, where I eventually met Martinez and then kind of moved back down to the Bay where we reconnected. It's fascinating how the triangles are created in this world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a small world.
That's so it really is. It's so crazy. Well, to cycle it back to the podcast, what movie will you never skip when channel surfing?
It's hard for me to go past The Godfather. I mean, that's an easy answer, of course, but it's not so much that it's like sort of the classic great movie that it is. It's that Al Pacino looks like my grandfather did when he was young in that movie.
Oh, wild.
And so whenever I watch it, I have this sort of kick of nostalgia, and also because I have a big Italian family on that side of the family, and he would have
Cat and I say a bit of a giveaway.
gives it away easily. Yeah. So yeah, he I think he looks a lot like him. That classic wedding scene, the very opening scene of the first movie. Al Pacino there looks a lot like my grandfather did at that stage in his life. And so it's always a thing where I'm like, I'm just going to sit and watch this. And then it just grabs you and it takes you on.
Yeah. I'm going to watch my grandfather become a mob boss. Growing up, what was your favorite book?
So Stranger in a Strange Land by Heinlein was one of my favorite that I would read over and over again. It changed my life in a lot of ways reading it. And at the same time, every time I've read it in the last 10 years or so, I cringe a little bit more reading it because it's got such like obvious and bad, tough to read misogyny. And also the technology sort of gets a little further away from reality. In terms of like, they have little recording devices that they use tiny little tapes and stuff, even though they're way in the future. And we're like, well, that's okay. So like some
it's interesting to see what the human mind can imagine and what it forgets to invent. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Like when you watch like tech, it's just like, if you go back and watch Star Trek, there's stuff that we still haven't come out with and there's stuff that we've come out with that's better. It's always like so fascinating. It's like we can't transport, but we have cell phones that are a lot smaller, or whatever communication device. It's always so hilarious.
Yeah, and then it's interesting when those same universes sort of fast forward up decades that they try to compensate for that in different ways. Like if you watch Discovery now, they're like, well, we're 900 years past whatever that was back then, and so now when you watch Discovery, they're like, we can do all kinds of things that before couldn't happen, and it's way still more advanced than this, and. I mean, yeah, it's still Star Trek. It's amazing, but like, it's compensating for that difference is pretty cool.
Yeah. So, God forbid, but if you had to evacuate your house in a hurry, what was the first thing that you would grab?
People. So it's the people, then the animals. Absolutely, no question.
All right, let's say both of those can get themselves out. You've been slow to the jump. You've shooed them out of the house.
Right. If I'm the last human out of the house and the last animal out of the house, then the next step has to be a really hard decision, which means I probably end up letting them both burn out of indecision and just standing there. But it's between the collection of magic cards, in part because of the nostalgia and in part because of just the raw value there. And then also I have this giant tub in my closet on the bottom there that's just full of old pictures and my grandfather's watch and a bunch of other things like that I would really have a hard time replacing. So it's what can you not replace? And
it's monetary versus sentimentary.
Well, and for Magic, it's both of those things, right? Because the value of all those reserve list cards sitting there in this. Actually, I have a beautiful library card catalog that I store them all in, so it's even harder to just pick up and run out the door with.
What comes to mind when I say underrated?
So for underrated, I think I immediately jump to what is the social media or media experience that I have had that I want to share with you because I think you probably haven't had it. And those sorts of things, for me, are these days they're books. They're the local public library here has this great thing they do every summer where they put out a bingo card, and it's for grown-ups. And they pick,
Sure it is.
Well, it is. They call it adult book bingo, and they have these 24 square, the free center square, so 24 squares, and each square is the topic or the type of the genre, who the author is, those sorts of things.
That's awesome.
And going through that process, it was recommended to me by a close friend, and going through the process of finding those titles and either listening to them as an audiobook or reading them, picking them up in a used bookstore down here, it's like it has opened my eyes and given me perspectives I've never would have come close to finding otherwise. And so just finding those, and it's all because it's a game. They've gamified reading in a way, but when they did, it's like it's amazing.
The answer to all problems that don't have enough intrigue is turn it into a game, to be sure. Mm-hmm. That is awesome, though. So, what's your favorite industry secret or a term that's only used in your line of work that you'd like to share with our listeners out there? Doesn't necessarily have to be this job. It can be any job that you've ever had, but what's one kind of hidden little sniglet of sorts?
Yeah. So I work, my day job is we call it risk management or safety related stuff. And I think the notion of, it's not so much a term, but it's a fact of life for, the public sector is that we're what's called self-insured, which is exactly what it sounds like, but people don't think about it. What it really is that when a bad thing happens, we pay for it. And what that means is that there's not an insurance company that's the deep pocket behind it. It's that when we have a mistake, when we have a fender bender, when we have something more serious, those things get paid for out of the public's dollars. And that means that when we're paying for those things, we have less money to pay for other things, right? Mm-hmm. We're paying for the mistakes that we make, and we're not paying for additional services or additional things. Yep. And that is a misconception because it can feel like, well, if I'm just going to sue somebody for something that went wrong, some insurance company is going to pick up that tab. Well, really, it's the rest of us, everyone together, picking up that tab. And I mean, it's sort of like a double-edged sword, because I would love to be able to take credit for that as an idea that says, well, because we all have this interest together, then we all do better and we prevent the bad things from happening. And sometimes we do. But it also can create this kind of scarcity, this culture of scarcity where we have to really be careful and protect everything. And I don't know, it can be tough sometimes.
Yeah, it sounds like an interesting kind of balancing act between almost like a moral quandary and a financial, crossword.
Mm-hmm. I mean, because we want to make whole the people who have experienced loss because of something mm-hmm. we've done wrong. And at the same time, we have this responsibility to serve the public in all these ways that, we're always faced with more priorities than we have the resources to fulfill.
Totally. That is a lot for me to kind of work my mind around. So to throw that completely to the wind, sure. What's the most bizarre fact you know to be true?
So bizarre facts, that's the thing, is that I don't know about bizarre. I think the things that I think about when I think about things that are bizarre are things like they're weird animals that, you know, nobody's really seen up close because they live at the bottom of the ocean in their brilliant colors or that sort of thing. Like that's when I think of bizarre things.
Bizarre might be a bit of a misnomer then, I guess. What's the fact that you know be true that most people wouldn't?
I feel like that things aren't as bad as everyone thinks they are. I think that's and maybe that's just me being an optimist, but I feel like negativity bias is a real thing in the world, and it makes it hard to have a conversation with someone or to make a change for the better when that change requires taking on some risk. And what I mean by that is like, when a bad thing happens, and this is instilled in us through evolution, right? This is, you know, the rustling in the bushes outside the light of the campfire. If I go out there and I get killed, then I don't reproduce and my genes don't go on. And so the people that didn't go out there because they were scared of the thing do reproduce, and evolution goes on. And so we have this innate feeling that the bad things that happen just are bad, and they're so bad that we're not going to try to find that better thing, even if it means that we might fail somewhere. And so I think the thing that I know to be true is that exists, and that at the same time we have to fight it, and we have to take a risk sometimes in order to make progress.
So to you, the kind of cosmic social consciousness response of, oh, you know, the sky is constantly falling, metaphorically speaking, is akin to that of the appendix. It's just this useless thing over human evolution that we just kind of have, that we obviously can't like immediately get rid of, but we really should, you know, try to find a way to not have it as much.
I mean, it's a useful instinct in a lot of places, right? It's the thing that keeps you from doing a thing that would otherwise be very harmful to you. And a lot of times that's true. It does that. But it also, like, we need to find a way to temper it. And because we are like rational thinking human people, we can probably do that. But when we get into large groups, it becomes a lot harder. And I think that's the thing, right? And I think, you know, to make it real, because this is a lot of philosophical jargon and, you know, bullshit, basically, right? So to make it real, news is one of those great, easy examples of negativity bias, right? One bad thing happens and it gets amplified by this megaphone, and the amplification, if that's leading somebody to feel empathy for somebody who's felt harm, if I say, wow, I saw this person in this car accident, or I saw this person with this terrible illness, or I saw on the news that this thing happened to this person and they're harmed by this, and I feel badly for them, and if it spurs me to action and say, well, I'm going to try to donate money to fight this disease or whatever the thing is, that's great. But if it means that I'm just more scared, that's not great. And that's sort of the problem.
So from that focal point, okay, I don't know where I'm going with this transition. What's the best piece of advice you've ever got?
The best piece of advice that I've ever gotten was one that I also pass along pretty frequently, and that is that if you're doing it alone, you're doing it wrong. That was given to me initially by Andy Hecht, who was the judge program manager for Wizards of the Coast for several years. And it was one of his mantras. And that's one of those things that, if you're doing it alone, you're doing it wrong. And that's, I've found that to be the case in work, in life, in, it's true all the time. And it's also something that I need to remind myself of.
I really hope no solo Olympic divers hear you say that and then take it too much to heart. But
I'm
do
pretty sure
definitely
those
agree
solo
with
Olympic divers would tell you they're not doing it alone either, right? They've got trainers, they've got a team.
I know.
Got...
I'm imagining them walking up the podium with like a friend. There's like, he said, if I'm doing it alone, I'm doing it wrong. I'm like, no. It's a one person activity. He said, if I'm doing it alone, I'm doing it wrong. And it's like, all right, sure, I guess jump then. Whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, that is a really good piece of advice. It makes you think, not only look at what you're doing, but think about what you're doing in a very different way. And like, to me, I immediately thought of like doing this podcast, and then I realized all the people that, all the guests that have had, my editor, and like all the friends that have kind of helped me in different ways set this up. Like, I would not have been able to do this without my first guest, who was also like gave me a lot of insight. I wouldn't be able to do this without my second guest, because now he's my editor and also was willing to take a chance and be on a really shoddy podcast. And so yeah, it does make it, I don't know, it's surface level and deeper than that simultaneously. That's really fascinating.
Well, just to be very clear, though, too, you can do something not alone and still do it wrong. just because you're not doing it alone doesn't mean you're doing it right. Just because you're not doing it alone doesn't mean you're doing it right. You can also screw it up if you're doing it with other people, too.
I'm trying really not hard not to take that personally. Do you have a favorite anecdote that you like to tell?
I mean, I love to tell stories generally and indulge in that in a way that is probably unhealthy for my ego. So,
is there one that usually comes up more frequently that you enjoy telling the most?
Yeah, I think there are a couple. One is that I guess it's a way of thinking about, like, my family means a lot to me, and my my family, my mother and stepfather run a bed and breakfast in central Vermont now. They've been there since 2008 or 9, I guess, and they've been running that place for a long time. And in 2011, Hurricane Irene, that came up sort of the eastern seaboard there. By the time it got to them, it was a tropical storm. But by the time you think about tropical storms in central Vermont, then if you also believe that climate change is not real, we have other things to talk about too. But by the time Irene got there, it was real bad for that community and for them specifically. They have their bed and breakfast is this beautiful place. It's this, if you think about sort of what does Vermont look like, that imagination of like rolling hills and changing leaves and pastoral landscapes and the rest, that's exactly it. It's this 5-story red barn, this big old farmhouse, a big, red Chevy truck in the driveway, kind of like classic feel to it. Goats in the field and a horse running around. It's beautiful. And it was just utterly destroyed by Irene because the rain was so heavy that it just saturated the hillsides, and the river that's across the street from them, the Ottaquechee, it flooded, and it flooded badly. And really the whole community was hit really hard by it. The little town called Woodstock and other communities in the region were hit hard too. And in just, really a very short time, their farmhouse and their business, their inn there, was turned into an island where the water went sort of through the back of the house, not inside the house. They got just up to the rafters in the basement. They took on 7 feet of water in the basement.
Good Lord. And
it just scoured this crater in the backyard where the garden used to be and where the driveway was, where it was about 30 feet long, about 15 feet wide, and deeper than I am tall. I'm 6 feet tall, and it was just this massive force of destruction for them, and it destroyed the road out. It's the main east-west route in the state there, Highway 4. It just destroyed a whole bunch of things there. And you'd think, well, all the water was in the basement, and that's not too bad, right? Because the house survived. The problem is that the basement is where everything that makes the house a house is. It's where the fire suppression system is. It's where the water system is, the electrical, the phone lines, the heating oil, and the furnace. All the things that make the house livable in winter was, destroyed in late August, which means and that process really was a big stressor for them. And so the week that happened, I was actually in New Orleans, of all places, at a conference on disaster readiness for my work in my previous job. And
who says irony doesn't exist?
Right. And so I got the call from my family and said, hey, we haven't heard from them in a little bit because the phones are out. And when I did get back in touch with them, they said, yeah, things are tough here, but we're hanging together. People are coming together, and we've got some help. And I said, well, I'm already halfway across the country. Why don't I just go the rest of the way? And so, and I actually had a tournament that I was going to be testing for my level 3 judge status at, in Philadelphia that weekend following. So I went to that tournament, tested, got my level 3 certification, and then it was a pro tour in Philadelphia there. And then immediately went from there up to Vermont and spent a week there helping them sort of recover. And we didn't have running water in the house. We didn't have, didn't have a lot of just the basic creature comforts of life there. And so what and the community really came together. There were folks that formed a sort of a bucket brigade. They showed up like the day after the storm in front of their house, taking this mud out from the basement after the fire department pumped out the water, but there's about a foot of mud left down there.
Lord.
And it's not just mud, right? Because it's a flood. It meant that the chicken farm next door or just up the street, it was the runoff from that, right? Not just
so they
mud.
got free eggs.
Not eggs, no. Not eggs. The runoff from a chicken farm. There's, other people's heating oil and other things that had been mixed in with the sludge. It was not good, right? But they emptied, the community came together with, buckets to empty that out. And by the time I got there, we were still digging out a little bit of that from sort of the walls and stuff. They had, these big water tanks we used for fire suppression. They had floated up in the water and then come to rest down with some of the flood, mud underneath them. And now they're full of, thousands of gallons of water that you have to then pump out. And then you have to lift these up and clean up. Like there's a whole process. A neighbor came down and he took a bleach sprayer to all the walls in the basement, because this is a stone basement down there. And we had to jackhammer this pit in the floor where we could get all the water to run off to so we could pump it out, when we were done cleaning all the bleach and stuff. All that, and then that night, my mom comes back to me and she says, I need you to do something. And she hands me her ledger. And, this is late August, early September. And foliage season for them is October, November. This is where they make all the money in the year that lets them run for the rest of the year. And she says, I need you to refund all these people their money. And it's $16,000 in deposits that all these different couples, families had, they had put down this money thinking, oh, we're just going to, spend the time together as a family doing this thing. And I have to give it back to them. And every time I'm giving it back, just punching the cards in the machine, and seeing this money evaporate, it's also like, it's this feeling of dread, like knowing that this is not there for them. What's going to happen? What's the next step? And so that's on top of just the physical, challenge of does the house become livable again at some point? And so they they go through that process. We give the money back, and a lot of folks came back and said, "Well, we don't want it. We don't want it back." And we give them credit, that sort of thing, instead, a gift card, that sort of thing. But even then, insurance doesn't cover anything because there's a water exclusion in the policy.
Of course.
And FEMA is also not a whole lot of help. FEMA offers something on the order of like $7,500.
And a crab cake.
And that's, in part because it's a business and not just a home, and there's a whole bunch of technicalities with it. But when it came down to it, $7,500 is not a whole lot. And between that and their savings, they probably have enough to keep the front of the house from freezing and the pipes from bursting, come winter. But it's not enough to reopen. Like, the dream is dead at that point. And then they get a call from a member of the community. And he says, I know somebody who is interested in helping a business get back on its feet. And I can offer this basically as a grant with no strings attached. Wow. And it was, and that's great, right? That's a lifesaver. That's the dream. That's the thing that saves the dream. But then at the same time, when we look around the community, why us? Why this family? Why this money for this business for us? Because just downriver, there's this bend where the river sort of goes around this field in a sort of very classic floodplain sort of way. And in the middle of that there are a whole bunch of mobile homes parked there, or they were, except that when the river came through, it's the livelihoods and everything that some people own just picked up right off of those block foundations and then smashed into the bridge downriver. And you think about what have they lost, and what do we lose here? And is it really something that we can feel good about saying yes to taking that boon? Because we see this in the rest of the community too. It's a hard thing to say yes to in that context. And, after thinking about it too, it's, if we can keep this business going, people will come back as tourists, and we'll be able to hire some folks that do the cleaning and do the other parts of the upkeep of the farm that people need. And when a wedding comes here, it's a good thing for the community economically, and it makes sense. So let's keep this going. Let's do it. And so they said yes. But at the same time, for weeks afterward, they were still down in those other homes from other people, because they got help from other people. They wanted to go help them too. And under the digging around in the crawl spaces and stuff, mucking those out too. And so, and then now every year they donate a little bit of their income to the fund that helps this longer term recovery in the town. But it to me, it's one of those things where seeing people come together as a community is something that, and we've seen it a lot in the last couple of years as communities have banded together and have tried. But at the same time, throughout this pandemic, people have also been experiencing a lot of fear that doesn't really abate. And it's not like it's localized to one place. And so I need sometimes a reminder that communities do exist in holistic, real ways. Community exists, and we support one another in those ways. Anyway, so I've taken a long time telling you that, but it's
no, it's a beautiful and kind of one of those reaffirming stories that you don't hear about. And one of the costs of living in like a big city, like I live in Los Angeles currently, that's never going to happen in LA. I mean, if you get onto like the far outskirts where it's like kind of its own little area, maybe, but by and large, it's not going to happen. But that's kind of one of the beautiful things. I grew up in a small town, and like I've lived in other small towns, and that dynamic of having a community where you know your neighbors, other people, and there's this kind of bonding element of being not just like we're the only people around, but having each other's backs and knowing your neighbor and like knowing about them and caring about them, it does lead to beautiful stories like that one and real human moments.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not really an anecdote. That was a much longer story. But you asked for an anecdote, so that's what came to mind.
And I got one and then some. So what do you regret not having done or tried before you graduated high school?
Probably not getting my driver's license. I didn't get my driver's license until I was 24 years old, and that limited a lot of my opportunities in a lot of different ways. Yeah, I really should have gotten buckled down and just gotten that and made it happen.
So were you in a large city where you didn't need one, like where there was like good public transit, or was it just like timidity? What was it about getting a driver's license that evaded you for so long?
I was scared, and I also didn't have the money to buy a car, so I didn't think it would be worthwhile. Yeah, but fundamentally I was scared of it. And I think the problem was that I actually wasn't in a big city that had, easy access to transit, that sort of thing. I lived up in the Santa Cruz Mountains in high school.
Okay. Yeah.
And just this very wealthy community, Los Gatos, just south of San Jose, high school there. And there was one bus in the morning and I think two options for a bus in the afternoon that would get you to and from and it was county run Valley Transit Authority bus. But that was the way to get to and from school if you didn't have a car or didn't have a friend with a car. And I didn't have friends with cars that would drive me there. And so I was reliant on the bus for that. Or you could bike back and forth, which was great for me when I was doing that. It was really good. It was a really good workout to get back and forth. But no, it made life harder. There were times, especially because it didn't run on the weekends either. So when I had a job, I was stuck using the bike back and forth. I remember there was one time where I had to I wanted to go get my paycheck, which was actually just cash under the table because I was flipping burgers at this place called Juicy Burger that was just really terrible food.
So you're saying they weren't juicy burgers?
They might have been undercooked if they were juicy. I don't know, but they were not great. But it was a job, paid cash, and I really wanted my paycheck at that time. And my folks said, no, we're not going to drive you down all the way down the hill just to get your money. I was like, well, screw it. I'll do it myself. And it had just finished raining after 3 days. And so there's a part of the bike path that goes down the hill that was just mud, just pure mud. And I get to that point. It's right by this reservoir on next to Highway 17. And I get into the mud and my wheels just sink, like basically up to the hubcap of the wheel, and the spindle of the wheel, and I'm just like, well, and so I basically had to pick up my bike and just walk it out the rest of the way down the hill to get it out of this mud, and it was just a mess, all for a couple $100 in small bills stuffed in an envelope basically, and I don't know, it was never worth it and never great.
So this leads to a question of why weren't you allowed to learn on the family car or anything like that? Why didn't your parents take you out and teach you?
Well, the car that we had, my mom had a 64 Mustang, bright yellow, convertible, lovely car, but, not
exactly
best,
a learning tool.
Yeah, not the best to learn on. And then
learn on a rocket.
Well, we also had a Pathfinder SUV thing, but it was a stick shift, so that's even harder to learn on. But I also, I was just scared of it too. The idea of driving a vehicle and hurting somebody with that was I would have nightmares about that when I thought about learning. So, yeah.
Gadzooks. Well, I'm glad you eventually figured it out.
That's that negativity bias, right? Worried about the very rare bad thing happening keeps me from doing the thing that actually has value.
Yeah, exactly. So fill in the blank for me. This weekend was so great. I spent 13 hours
playing Destiny. Actually, playing Magic the Gathering is actually the right answer to that question for me, but it's one that
currently it's more likely to be playing Destiny.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What do you wish you had started sooner?
So starting sooner, that also assumes that I'd still do it now, which...
No, you could have stopped it, but what do you wish that you had, begun earlier in your timeline?
Well, I mean, driving is one of those for sure. But I think the other thing was I wish I'd started playing Magic a little bit earlier, because I started playing in 96, 97, which is when they started printing all the things past the reserve list that are now worth not quite as much money as if I had started 2 years earlier and been able to pick up, the stuff that's very, very valuable now.
Did you keep all your cards from when you started?
I kept them up until about maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I remember my folks gave me they said, "Hey, we found this in your storage thing." And for every Magic player out there who's listening, they're like, "Oh, they found the things in the storage thing. Oh, that's amazing." And it was a bunch of 4th edition cards, nothing that interesting.
A bunch of napkins. Woo!
Right. But yeah, I mean, I had those. I just didn't have anything really of much value at that point. I remember I did.
But if you had, you would have it would have been a treasure find of.
I mean, I think
much value.
I know that at one point there was a sort of a grab bag that my local store around the corner from my dad's house had a pay $1, get a repack, and the repacks might have a card in there that says, "You've won this very special thing." And I won a volcanic island with one of those at one point, but I remember being distinctly disappointed that it was not a Baron Sangir. So yeah. Volcanic Island now being worth several $100s, and Baron Sangir now being worth several nickels. So
on the flip side of this hilarious coin, what do you wish you had ended sooner?
Well, I wish I had gotten out of the job that I had before the one that I do a little bit earlier. I had an opportunity to do that when they laid me off in the sort of financial crisis, 2009. But I went back to them a few weeks later because I needed a job. I felt like I had to have a job. I was worried about losing my house. And I wish I had sort of stuck to that at some point and instead really looked for something that was with a company or an agency or an employer that really valued my time in a way that was different. Underestimating your own value is a very easy thing to do, especially when you're young and in a vulnerable state for financial and when the employer holds all the power. It feels like that. But yeah, I think I wish I had really advocated for myself more in that and found a job that I loved. But at the same time, I do appreciate them for laying me off when they did. Because it did give me yes, it did end up with me losing my house at the time. I owned a small house in Sacramento, and what it also did is it gave me an opportunity to explore other things that I felt were maybe more valuable uses of my time for that short period where I could still imagine that it wasn't the worst thing to be unemployed. And what I mean is it was really that my wife at the time said, I was just sort of kicking around the house and I was not, gardening for me is one of those things I really want to do. It's one of those things that it lets me put that order to chaos, right? It's that it lets me have some control over the world in a little way and also make something beautiful and smell good and tasty and the rest of it. But when I was facing that prospect of losing the house, gardening then just felt like I was rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, right? Because it's just, you're going to lose it anyway. And so she said, you got to get out of the house. You got to do something else. Go find an opportunity somewhere else. And so I there was a Planned Parenthood clinic that was just maybe half a mile from our house. And I went there and I volunteered. And volunteering for those weeks as a clinic escort, because it was 1 day a week that they performed abortions, or maybe 2 days a week. But volunteering there as a clinic escort really confirmed for me that there were these things that I could do where I could make a difference in somebody's life. And it wasn't like confronting protesters. That's not what you do there. That's the protesters are meaningless in that situation. The purpose of that clinic escort gig is to make sure that the person who's coming there because they need care feels safe, and that the people that they're with have somebody to talk to if they need to talk to somebody in that moment. And those conversations those stick with me in a way that, very few really good days at that job that has laid me off do. Those conversations stick with me as, it's the partner of the person who's there to get an abortion. He comes out of the waiting room because he can't stand being in the lobby, and he just also can't stand being in earshot of the protesters because they just infuriate him. And so he turns to me and we start talking, and he said, I have mixed feelings about this. I wish we could. I wish we could keep this pregnancy. I wish we could continue this, but it's not the right time for us. We don't have, one of us has just lost our job. There's a whole bunch of other things going on, and but I can't. We can't do this. And just having somebody there to listen to that person, to hear their feelings on that, and to hear them and let them know that they're not alone. Like, that's one of the most powerful things that any human can do for another, is to let them know that they're not alone. And being there, being in that space for that person at that time was some of the most valuable work I'll ever do.
In a weird, not strictly linear way, that's kind of going back to the best piece of advice you ever got, right? You're helping this person not be alone.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not doing this activity by themselves anymore.
Yeah, no, that's a great callback. You're right. Yeah.
To something, hopefully, a tad more on the positive side. What is your favorite highlight of your moment thus far? Like, if you're looking at it like it was a, ESPN, celebrating the moment of this guy's career or whatever, what would be the moment that you would want to see most?
So the thing that I wish I could replay in a highlight reel for myself, is actually not from any specific, it's not from work. It actually is something that I wish I had more pictures of and had clearer memories of, which is a cycling trip that my family took back when I was in that sort of golden interregnum between graduating high school and starting college, right? That summer is like this golden era for a lot of people, right? And for us, my family, I had 3 younger siblings, one a year younger, 2 years younger, or 3 years younger, and then one that was 16 years younger than me. So she was 18 months when we were doing this trip. And we took a 3-week bicycle trip to Italy. And so we trained for months, just riding up and down the hills. We lived around in Santa Cruz Mountains there. And then I spent 3 weeks, in Italy with my family. We put our bikes on the plane, reconstructed them in the airport in Milan, and did it very much on a shoestring budget, because you've got, 5 people in this family. You're not going to stay in a hotel every night. So we did a lot of camping, and also I was in the best shape of my life at the end of it, right? I probably lost like 20 pounds over the course of riding a bike for, at least 60 kilometers a day for 3 weeks. With all your camping gear on the back, going over the the mountains in Italy. So I think that's one of those things, is like having, there's at the end of one of those rides, we did came down out of the mountains into a little city called Ravenna. And at the end of that, we had done 100 kilometers that day, and it felt great. And then and that's like that moment there. I could recall some parts of it, but I know it was also like 20 years ago. So I probably am misremembering things, and I'm probably not fully with all of it. And so that's what I think the purpose of a highlight reel is, really to like remind you of the things that you would otherwise have forgotten, and also to remind you of the reality, at least in photographic reality, of what that was at the time.
Awesome. Using it for a very economical way. So before we throw it to break, I got one last question. If you could share one song with the listeners out there, which song would you share with them?
So one of my favorite artists is a person named Dessa, and she is a hip-hop artist out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and she is amazing. One of the brightest people I can imagine. It's hard for me to imagine she hasn't gotten the Genius Award from the MacArthur Fellowship or that sort of thing already, because she is truly a unique mind in that respect. And her music is transcendent for me. It's one of those things that I have a hard time not just like reveling in and hitting repeat a whole bunch. And at the same time, it still feels fresh a lot when I'm listening to it. So just before the pandemic, November 2019, I decided that I would take a vacation that wasn't related to magic, and that I would take it solo. And it was the first time I'd done that really in my own memory. And what I did is I went from our home here in Seattle to the United Kingdom, to London, and then to Wales. And Dessa was performing with the BBC Orchestra, the National Orchestra of Wales, in Cardiff. And I also used my time in London to go see Hamilton there. And so she did this thing where she got these arrangements with her music and this orchestra in the background that's fantastic and amazing. And at the same time, I'd never been to the UK, had never been to Cardiff, and it was a beautiful place. And it's one of those like peaceful places that I go to now in my mind when I try to remember what the rest of the world out there is like, because it's been so long since so many of us have seen it. And so that concert that she gave with the orchestra there was fantastic and transcendent and wonderful. And at the same time, there's a recording of her in a previous orchestral arrangement with the Minnesota Orchestra that she put an album out called Sound the Bells for. So one of the songs on that, Fire Drills, is, I think, a fantastic and wonderful song that really speaks to a lot of things that mean a lot to me. And so Fire Drills is one of those. And that's what I would say. So Fire Drills with the orchestral backing and a live show.
Awesome. And with that, we're going to throw it to our first break. Feel free to stick around and enjoy the totally real commercial, or take a minute to enjoy Fire Drills by Dessa, or just fast forward. Either way, see you in a jiffy. Do you ever find yourself doing a mundane activity with nothing to keep you from gouging your eyes out or sticking a pencil through one ear and out the other? Uh-huh. Well, then perhaps I could introduce you to music. Music comes in a variety of different types, flavors, and colors. Theorists say that it's the best thing to introduce to your life since food. So go out and get some and make your life just a little bit more bearable. Welcome back, folks. I'm here with Sean. So, Sean, what is your passion?
So, I don't know. What did I say? No, it's
the way you put it earlier was you like to bring order to chaos.
Yeah, so that's
or bring order out of chaos.
Yeah, for me that's things like doing the dishes, keeping a clean home, those kinds of things. Gardening is one of those order to chaos kinds of things. And that's something that it's a passion of mine that I think I earned very early on in life, because my grandfather on my dad's side, he had a series of strokes and other medical issues that affected his brain before I was born even. And so all his life that I knew him, he was just a little different And one of the things that was affected there was his ability to organize things. And he still kind of kept an office that allowed him to have a sense of purpose and be able to do things. But at the same time, those things that he was doing weren't necessarily a real job. They weren't really business. And what I mean is he was doing things like he had this dream of publishing a book, but the book was just jokes that he had found on the internet and then printed onto pieces of paper and put into a file drawer and collected over time with no credit or attribution to anyone. He just said, these are things I found on the internet and I want them together, and someday I'll publish a book and it'll be amazing. Which is like, of course not. Nobody's ever going to read that book. Nobody's ever going to publish that book. He had the, because the internet exists. So if you want the joke, you just go find it. But the, or he had these stacks of letters that were rejection notices from all the late night talk show hosts like David Letterman, Jay Leno, those guys. And, they were rejection letters because he had recorded these cassette tapes of himself and mailed them to these talk show hosts thinking that he could get on as a musical guest playing his guitar. And like, no, you can't. That's not how this works. That's not how the world works. But he had this dream and he wanted to keep doing it. But his office was this mess of things that there's no organization to it at all. And when it would get into that state, he would stop doing these things. He would stop working. And while that might be nice for the guys who have to send the rejection letters because they have fewer rejection letters to send, it was not good for his mental health, right? And not good for him to not have a thing to do. And so whenever I'd go over there probably once a week, every couple weeks, and there were like 3 things I would do in that home with my grandparents. And one was flip the mattress because I was the oldest grandchild and so therefore the strongest. And so I had to flip the mattress upstairs, fine. And the other was to put the office back in order. And so it's to, file things, just put order to that chaos. And, it took me a while to really, as I was thinking about it, to say, well, this is actually, it may not have a lot of purpose for the wider world, but for him and me together, this is a shared purpose and a time together. And it means a lot. And so whenever that practice of putting order to chaos comes up for me, it's sort of a feeling of peace and a feeling of doing that. And so that's something that I find a lot of purpose in, is just, and what that means is that, if I'm having dinner at your house, I'm probably going to try to do the dishes. Or if I'm, that's actually how I got one of my first jobs is I was at a bookstore in the manga graphic novel section. And I just started organizing it just on my own. I was just like, these are out of order. This goes this way. And then this employee of the bookstore came by and he says, I have this list and these are all books that we're supposed to find and pull from the shelf because the publisher wants them back. I didn't know then that he was going to destroy them, but I was like, sure, I'll go find this list of books for you. And I'm just random, high school customer.
You hadn't even offered payment yet. You were just like, yeah, no, totally.
Well,
wandered
it
off.
may have been that I was looking over his shoulder as he was pulling the list. And I was like, well, that one's over here. That one's over here. And just like, just did it without being asked. But eventually I got a job at Borders doing that. And
That's
that
awesome.
was one of my easiest jobs ever, but also favorite. Yeah.
When you were initially doing this with your grandfather, did this start off as a chore, or did you how quickly did you fall in love with bringing order to chaos?
I didn't really see it as a chore. I did see it as a way to make some money. I mean, they paid me for it.
Okay.
But yeah, I feel like it was not. It wasn't something that someone had to ask me to do in a way that you sort of ask a kid to make their bed, or you ask you tell people to do something they wouldn't otherwise be doing. It felt like a salve. It felt like a meaningful thing to do at the time too.
So now as a full-grown adult, Do you find yourself seeking that out, or do you just enjoy bringing order to chaos when the opportunity arises?
So now I seek that out for sure. Gardening is one of those things, like having a house now, because for the first year of the pandemic, I was living in a studio apartment on my own. And I had some plants out on a patio, but they didn't really do well. And it was kind of a dark, shady patio on the north side of a building in Seattle, which doesn't get much sunlight. So it wasn't great. Having a yard now, it's fantastic. I look forward to the season where I have a ton of raking to do in the front yard. I look forward to the opportunity to pull, the vegetables from my garden and put new ones in. And those are putting order to chaos in another way. I specifically wanted a push mower, like the ones without any engine to them. You just have to just roll the blades across.
You wanted
the
to go old school.
I specifically wanted that because there's a feeling of it. For one, it takes longer, and it's better exercise, but it takes longer, and that means I spend more time with it and think about it a little bit more as I'm doing it. It gets me into that state, that place. So yeah.
Well, my teenage self wants to swap you the push mower for the power motor. If we can make that happen, I'm sure my 13-year-old self would be very happy.
Yeah.
Is there a big misconception about your passion by the wider world, do you think?
Yeah, I think that when someone feels like they get a lot of value out of putting order to chaos, the downside of that is that you can be perceived as a control freak, like that you want to be in control of all the things at all the times, and you don't allow for just sort of natural chaos to exist, and natural chaos has its purpose. And so I think that's the downside of it. And I think that's also something it's real. I have to be aware of that when I'm doing that in someone else's space. Like if I was to do dishes in your house after, I would definitely have to be like, I need to ask permission to do this because one, I might break something, and two, I don't know where anything lives. And so if I put things back in the wrong place, I'm just adding to your chaos. I'm not actually helping. So yeah, I think there's a downside to that for sure.
And I mean, also in that circumstance, another benefit is when you're asking them, it allows them to say yes or no, and it feels like you're not barging into their space and their living area and doing a thing without, the kind of pomp and circumstance of being, a polite citizen in our society.
This, as in all things, consent is paramount. Yeah.
So before we go on to the peeve, you just reminded me of one of the first times I realized I'm very much in a similar boat. I really do enjoy putting order to chaos, especially when it's other people's stuff, just because I like doing things for other people. But I remember when I really started to realize that I enjoyed doing that. I was over at my friend Colin Phallic Farce's dorm room when he was at San Jose State. And he, like the two of us, has a fairly good-sized Magic collection, but he had, somewhere between getting baked day in and day out and just being a college student who had, video games to play and classes to go to and homework to occasionally look at, had let it just kind of sprawl all over his room. And I was crashing there for a couple days, and I was like, all right. And we're out at lunch. I was like, all right, so how much for me to sort your collection?
Mm-hmm.
And he thinks about it for a little bit. And I think we haggled a bit. It got me $20 or $40. And as I'm doing it, he's watching me. He just looks over. He goes, "You would have done this for free if I hadn't been willing to pay you, right?" And I was like, absolutely.
Yes.
This was happening. And assuming you didn't kick me out of your room, this was happening regardless. I was just, I was just wily enough and broke enough that I was, I tried to get some coin out of it. But yeah, I was sitting there just like a kid in a candy shop, just sorting by CMC and color and just having a ball. It was fantastic.
First absolutely. By CMC and then by color? That sounds terrible.
No. It's color. You do the way I've done it. This is via Hearthstone has kind of put a permanent stamp on my brain. I do by color, and then I do by CMC, going 0 to 7+. because that's the way it works on the Hearthstone client, and I find that there's not that much above 7 anyway.
Yeah, I've also spent more time organizing my own Magic cards than I have playing with them. By like an order of magnitude, I'm pretty sure. But for me, it's by color, then by card type, and then by copies that I own in my collection, where the 4-ofs go in the front of the section of black sorceries, and then the 1-ofs go toward the back of that section. So it's card type, it's color, card type, and then number of copies. And if there's a grouping of them, then it's also by their general purpose. So like the 1-mana blue cantrips get stuck together, and the counterspells get stuck together. Those sorts of things.
Oh man, as long as we're not getting to alphabetical, that's where you start to lose me. That gets a little too egregious.
Oh, yeah.
But that is truly a player's, like, I love how you spent more time ordering it than playing with it, but the way you've ordered it is clearly with the player's mindset in mind. So it's kind of beautiful.
Yeah.
Anyway,
order to chaos.
Back to the gotta bring order to the chaos, man. So to pivot a bit from the beautiful and the passionate, what is your preposterous peeve, my friend?
So Peppa Pig is just terrible. And I know that this is like, I'm kind of a snob when it comes to the stories that I'll read to the kiddo here at night, but like Peppa Pig is just like, the TV show, I can say I've avoided it like successfully. I will, and at the same time, like the stories in the books, if the stories in the books are any indication of the TV show, I'm just like, why does this exist? Why did somebody pay money to produce this thing? And why did another person decide, hey, I will share this with the world in such a way that that it will influence children's lives? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. And I realize that that's a harsh perspective on, a piece of media that was only trying to help, but it's just not.
What does it do that offends you so greatly?
So, do you remember the movie Elf?
Yeah.
Okay, so you remember what Buddy the Elf's biological dad does in the movie Elf?
Yeah, he creates is it kids' books? I know it's like books,
yeah.
Right?
He's a children's book publisher, right? Mm-hmm. And there's this scene where he's getting chewed out by his supervisor because he has signed off on these pages in this kid's book, and the pages have nothing on them. Where the page is just blank and it's got his little signature on it, and he has created a book that has like not just an obvious break in continuity, but like just nothing for a page or two. And his argument is that, well, they're kids, they're not going to care about story continuity or whatever, and whatever. He still gets chewed out for it. I want to have that conversation with the creator of Peppa Pig. And it's not that the pages are blank, but some of them might as well be.
For all intents and purposes.
Yeah. The stories just, there's this one story in the book, and the kiddo loves it, and I'm just like, that's not how it works. And it's about building a house. It's about building a house where, like, Daddy Pig wants to build a house, and he says, we're going to build a house and someone else can live in it. And so first off, I'm like, well, so what you're telling me is Daddy Pig is this rent-seeking developer of real estate, and we really, like, that's the one problem of this here. But the other is that he goes to the contractors and he shows them a drawing of the house, and then they build the house. But the house is built literally the next day. And I'm like, no. I get that kids' stories need to suspend disbelief at some point because these are talking pigs, right? I get it. But a house built in a day, and then the family moves into it the next day, but at least they get that there's an inspection between the two. Like, they talk about the inspection of the house between the two. But I'm like, oh my God. It is infuriating.
It was clearly written by two people. There's just one person who's writing, all right, it's got to be down to code, there got to be inspection, and they move into it the next day. Yeah, sure, Timmy, they move into it the next day. Like a father-son duo wrote this book.
Oh, it's just, and it's this book of stories that has like several of these stories in it, and I'm just like, every one of them has these gaping plot holes that are just not, anyway. So Peppa Pig for me is one of those where I will endure the full meltdown of a child whining and crying, saying, "I want to read this for bedtime." I'm like, we will go without, or we will not really. We will find something else to read. But we will.
You looking to fight? Because I will fight you.
No, we will find something else to read. We'll find a different story.
So when did you notice? Like, when did you first feel the rage bubbling up when reading Peppa Pig? Was it on the first read? You were just like, no, or... Yeah. You cannot order it without rearranging it yourself. So what is your ideal one that the little child concedes to most frequently?
Well, she actually seeks it out. It's there are a number of books that I have bought more than once because I want them in different rooms of the house, or I just forgot that I bought them. More likely, it's just that I forgot that I bought them, or I bought them and I thought they had been lost. But one is, and I've gotten them, every time I've gotten them from Powell's bookstore in Portland, Oregon. And every time I've gotten them, because I've gotten them multiple times, I kind of think that Powell's should have told me, like, hey, you bought this one already. But at the same time, I've got it. And so one's this thing called A Big Book of Peace, it's a bunch of short stories at various reading levels. Some of them just, quick little picture things, some of them longer narratives with really few pictures. And they're all stories about social justice, stories about the civil rights movements and protests, or those kinds of things. And those are near and dear to my heart. And, one of the things that gives me sort of hope in the world is seeing that she engages with those stories in a way that makes me think that the future will be better because of her, because of what she does.
That's awesome. Although, for a bedtime story, I don't think of social justice as a thing that I would curl up after reading. So maybe I'm envisioning a different kind of story. What kind of stories we talking here? Is this like something like, a lot more fictitious and cuddly, or is this like grounded in historical reality?
Yeah, there's one story in particular called The Silent Lobby that's just it's about a group of voters who are coming from the Deep South, and they're coming to Washington, D.C. on this rickety, falling apart bus, and it's told from the perspective of this 13-year-old boy whose family is there, whose father lost his job because he told his foreman that he was going to vote, and they make their way to Washington, D.C. because the representatives that they've elected, or they think they've elected, that there's a difference in the process there, where at one point Congress decided to seat certain representatives from the state instead of others, and I won't get into all the historical details of it, in part because I would guaranteed to get it wrong here, but the upshot of it is that the folks on the bus stand in the rain in this tunnel that they don't know is also the tunnel that members of Congress are going to use as they walk from their offices to Congress to vote on seating these members. And by standing there in the rain in this nonviolent protest, they don't change the outcome of the vote, but they do change the magnitude of the vote, and it sort of speaks to the way that, when people are forced to see the person against whom they are committing an injustice, they are less likely to commit that injustice. They're more likely to respond to that humanity and make a change. And at the same time, as a bedtime story, it's quiet. It's not violent. Does it end? Not obviously in happily ever after. It's grand in reality, but does it end in a peaceful way that leads one to a beautiful sleep, or does it have your mind kind of, chugging along? I think it's one of those where, like, at the end of that story, she'll ask questions and she'll be like, so why were they cold in the rain? Why didn't they have jackets? Why didn't, or why were, we ask questions and we talk about those things together. But that process is still, like a universe beyond the inanity of Peppa Pig.
And with that awesome tying of the bow, we're going to head to our second ad break. But don't go anywhere, because when we get back, Sean is going to enter the lightning round. See you in a bit. Have you ever just looked at fried carbs on a plate and thought, I need to eat those, but it doesn't taste all that appetizing? Introducing catsup. Catsup is a sugary and red syrupy paste that'll overshadow any unappreciated taste. Simply douse the unpreferred tasting object and ingest.
Thanks, catsup.
And we're back. Sean, are you ready to enter the lightning round?
Is there a god or
Lightning round?
I'm restraining my urge to ramble now and forever. So I will do what I can to help you here.
All right. Put however much time it takes to bake this cookie on the clock. Sean, is there a god?
No.
Shakira's voice in Danny DeVito's body, or Danny DeVito's voice in Shakira's body?
Danny DeVito's voice in anybody's body.
Danny DeVito's voice in Shakira's body it is. Have you ever paid more for a meal than you made in a week?
Regrettably, yes.
You're having the best day of your life. What happens next? Another amazing thing or something terrible?
Another amazing thing.
Would you rather give up cheese or naps?
Naps.
Can billionaires be ethical?
No.
No one's looking. Do you put the cart back or leave it in the parking lot?
Always put it back.
If you had the power to see the future but couldn't change it, would you use it?
No.
Pineapple on pizza. Go ahead.
No.
Pineapple on pizza or fist fight?
Oh, pineapple on pizza with bacon and roasted garlic. The best thing ever.
Kill the spider or get an adult?
Take the spider out yourself.
Is there a price for you to give up? Is there a price for you to give up your passion forever?
My sanity.
Boneless or bone-in wings?
Boneless.
Which one of your parents settled?
My mom.
Which do you max out first? Intelligence, charisma, or strength?
Charisma, and figure out the rest because other people give it to you.
Did you ever cheat on a test in school?
I helped someone else cheat once.
Kanye or no?
No.
Are we alone in the universe?
God, I hope not.
Would you rather have your inner monologue sound like Gilbert Gottfried or Fran Drescher?
Fran Drescher.
Are Cheez-Its addicting?
No.
Tacos or burritos?
Burritos all the way. Gotta package everything at once.
Morning or night shift?
Night shift.
Would you rather be 10 minutes late for everything or 20 minutes early for everything?
20 minutes early as long as I've got my cell phone to, scroll Twitter or whatever.
Congratulations, Sean. You've survived the
lightning round.
Is there anything you'd like to ask me and in turn be asked of future guests?
Well, in the spirit of order to chaos here, would you rather do the dishes or would you rather make the food?
I'm a terrible cook, so I'd rather do the dishes.
If you're a terrible cook, I would rather you do the dishes too.
I'm also pretty good at doing the dishes. Shout out Pops. All right. Anything you want to plug, recommend, places people can find you or any content you make?
Oh, I think they've all heard plenty of my voice by now, don't you?
Is there anything that you've watched recently, listened to recently, big fan of any particular author that you'd like to kind of pump up their jam, so to speak?
You know, the Foundation series on Apple TV Plus was surprisingly, it does not hew well to the books from what I recall having read them recently, but it is still a good thing in its own right, and I really do like it.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. Well, thank you, Sean, for being my guest today, and special thanks to my editor, Richard Ashford, and my composer, Joshua Gibbons. And especially thank you, everybody listening at home or wherever you found time to appreciate this. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, like, or just share with a friend. Every little bit helps. Or if you already have and are out of episodes to listen to, don't worry. We put out new episodes every Monday at midnight on SoundCloud, YouTube, and now Spotify at Passionate People and Preposterous Peeves podcast. And a very special thanks are due to our first patron, Sabella Yellow. Thank you very much. Yes, you heard that right. We have a Patreon, and you can be part of it too. Just head over to patreon.com/Passionate People and Preposterous Peeves podcast. And remember, folks, grass is green, roses are red, violets aren't blue. I'm colorblind. How about you?